Hi again, guys. I'm back. I was thinking today, I was watching one of the channels, and I heard the old saying, the old adage, if you see something, say something. And it got me to thinking, and the old thing of it takes a village, and it does, it really does. Got me to thinking about everybody slinging out the children were being abused, they were being neglected. Why didn't this one or that one say something or do something? And I started thinking. And so I started doing some research and I started looking it up. And I'm going to read off what I found and then give my opinion if I have one on that specific subject. And y'all tell me what you think. Because some of you probably already know all this, and some of you don't. But here it goes. First off, childhood poverty. A chronic stress can even lead to problems regulating emotions as an adult, linked to a host of negative outcomes. Poverty is often considered the single best predictor of child maltreatment, especially child neglect. Okay, so poverty. Yeah, we all know poverty can be depressing. But didn't realize poverty caused you to neglect your child. But I guess it could if you don't have the money to take care of them correctly. You can't provide what you need to provide them with. But that don't mean you can't do your best. Okay, next. There's 18 states out of the United States that says any person that sees something that they consider to be neglect, they are required to report it. That means if you're sitting in a doctor's office, if you're sitting in the courthouse, if you're walking down the street, or you're standing in Walmart, if you see what you think to be child neglect or child abuse, you are required to report it. Those 18 states are Delaware, Florida, Idaho, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Mississippi, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming. Next one. Physical neglect. Physical neglect is by far the most common type of neglect in most cases. The parent or caregiver is not providing the child with all of the basic necessities like food, clothing, and shelter. In some cases, young children are left without proper supervision for extended periods of time. Sort of like thinking that children are old enough to babysit younger children when the oldest child isn't old enough to be without a babysitter. Something like that. Okay. Forms of child neglect include allowing the child to witness violence or severe abuse between parents or adults, ignoring or insulting or threatening the child with violence, not providing the child with a safe environment and adult emotional support, and showing reckless regard for the child's well-being. Who's that sound like to you? Okay. What is considered child neglect in the state of Tennessee? Neglect: the failure to provide for a child's physical survival needs to the extent that there is harm or risk of harm to the child's health or safety. For example, abuse or neglect may stunt physical development of the child's brain and lead to psychological problems, such as low self-esteem, which could later lead to high-risk behaviors such as substance abuse. There's 2 strikes. Reporting child abuse and neglect is a community-wide responsibility. It takes a village, people. Anyone who suspects on a reasonable grounds that a child or young person is at risk of being abused or neglected should report it to the reporting authority in their state or territory. A lot of them people out there saw them kids, and nobody seemed to call the right person to report it. Or maybe the right person just didn't believe it, or didn't want to do anything about it. Alright, next. Anyone who forms a reasonable belief that a child is in need of protection from significant harm due to abuse or neglect can make a report to Child Protections. If a child is in immediate danger, contact the police. In some jurisdictions, it is mandatory to report suspicions of all 5 recognized types of abuse and neglect, i.e., physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and exposure to family violence. Strange thing about it is there might have been a lot of people called CPS, but evidently not the right person called CPS. Wonder who that could have been. If you think a child might be being abused, but they haven't said anything to you, there are things you can do which can help. 1. Talk to the child. Most children who are being abused find it very difficult to talk about it. Keep a diary. Talk to their teacher or their health visitor. Speak to other people, or talk to us. Abuse exists when a person under the age of 18 is suffering from, has sustained, or may be in immediate danger of suffering from or sustaining a wound, injury, disability, or a physical or mental condition caused by brutality, neglect, or other actions or inactions of a parent, relative, or guardian. Once again, what is considered child neglect in Tennessee? Neglect is a failure to provide for a child's physical survival needs to the extent that there is harm or risk of harm to the child's health or safety. Section 343 of the Children and Young People Act of 2008 deems that neglect of a child or a young person means a failure to provide the child or young person with the necessity of life if the failure has caused or is causing significant harm to the well-being or development of the child or young person. Understanding the 6 types of neglect. Physical neglect. Deprivation of needs neglect. Medical neglect. Supervisory neglect. Environmental neglect. Educational neglect. And emotional neglect. Physical neglect. The failure to provide necessary food, clothing, and shelter. Inappropriate or lack of supervision. Medical neglect. The failure to provide necessary medical or mental health treatment. And of course, again, educational neglect and emotional neglect. Signs of neglect. This is what you're supposed to be looking for when you see a child and something doesn't seem right. poor appearance and hygiene, being smelly or dirty, being hungry, or not given money for food, health and development problems, anemia, housing and family issues, living in an unsuitable home environment such as having no heat, change in behavior and becoming clingy. What child do we know that was very, very clingy? What is the most powerful predictor of child neglect? Childhood poverty and chronic stress can even lead to problems regulating emotions as an adult. Linked to a host of negative outcomes, poverty is often considered the single best predictor of child maltreatment, especially child neglect. How do you prove emotional neglect? To prove neglect, you need to show a child's basic physical and or emotional needs are not being met and that a child is not being properly cared for. If the other parent doesn't feed the child, for example, or does not make sure the child gets to school, these can be potential signs of neglect. Here we go. This is starting to get into where the whole reason I looked this up. Our church staff's mandated reporters. Clergy members are among a list of more than 40 mandated reporters, meaning they are required under state law to report suspected abuse. But that doesn't apply if they learn about something during a private communication such as confession and so on during, the Catholic Church. Here we go. Dentists are obligated to document and report suspected cases of abuse in all states. Now, who do we know that is a dental hygienist that was around Summer and her brothers? They are not obligated to prove the abuse or neglect, just to report what is suspected. Dental hygienists may be similarly obligated depending on the states in which they live and work. I believe Tennessee is one of those states. Any member of the clergy, priest, or Christian Science practitioner who reasonably believes that a minor is or has been the victim of injury, abuse, child abuse, a reportable offense, or neglect shall immediately report or cause a report to be made. And where was Summer? Every Saturday, according to Dawn. Okay, and this one is the last one. Which is worse, abuse or neglect? Chronic neglect is associated with a wider range of damage than active abuse, but it receives less attention in policy and practice. In the U.S., neglect accounts for 78% of all child maltreatment cases, far more than physical abuse at 17%. Sexual abuse is at 9%, and psychological abuse is at 8% combined. Now, in my opinion, that church, Miss Robin Lane, the minister at the church, the congregation at the church, and I keep saying the church because that's technically the only place this child ever went. Well, all the kids, if you count the boys were going to school. They had teachers, principals, assistants, lunch ladies, janitors. Then we have Leslie and Allie and grandma and great grandma and half a dozen other people that saw these kids. in the state of Tennessee, by law, they were supposed to report abuse if they saw it or suspected it.